The Whispering Walls, Chapter 1. My great-aunt Eleanor Vance was a name I knew, a distant relative mentioned occasionally at family gatherings, always with a certain air of mystery, a quiet reluctance to delve too deep into her story. She lived a life apart, in a small, remote coastal town, rarely visiting, rarely spoken of in detail. I knew little about her, only that she was my grandmother's older sister, and that there had been some unnamed sadness, some difficulty in her past that kept her separate from the rest of the family. When I received a formal letter from a lawyer informing me of her passing, and, to my utter surprise, that I was the sole beneficiary of her estate, it felt like a chapter had opened in a book I didn't even know existed. My name is Clara. I'm 65 years old, a widow, my children grown and living their own lives. I lived a quiet life in the suburbs, far removed from the rugged beauty and isolation of the coast where great-aunt Eleanor had resided. Inheriting her estate, especially her small, dilapidated cottage overlooking the sea, was unexpected. A strange twist of fate that pulled me out of my comfortable routine and towards a past I knew nothing about. The cottage was located in a town called Port Blossom, a name that sounded picturesque but hinted at the wildness of the coast. It was a long drive, the landscape growing more dramatic, the air cooler and carrying the distinct scent of salt and brine as I approached the sea. Port Blossom was a small, insular community, nestled against the cliffs, its houses weathered by wind and spray. It felt like a place where time moved slower, where old secrets were held close. The cottage itself was charming but in disrepair. Perched on the edge of a cliff, it had a breathtaking view of the ocean, but its paint was peeling. Its roof needed repair, and its interior was dusty and filled with the accumulated belongings of a long life lived quietly. Stepping inside felt like stepping back in time. The air was thick with the smell of the sea and something else, something old and melancholic. The lawyer who handled the estate was a local man, Mr. Peterson, his family having lived in Port Blossom for generations. He was kind but reserved, offering little insight into great-aunt Eleanor's life or why she had left everything to me, a distant niece she barely knew. Eleanor was a private woman, he said, his gaze distant as he looked out at the sea, kept to herself. Had her reasons, I suppose. Sorting through the cottage was a daunting task, but also a journey of discovery. Every object seemed to hold a story, a whisper of the past. Old photographs filled albums, showing faces I didn't recognize, scenes from a life lived before my time. Furniture was worn, polished smooth by years of use. Closets were filled with practical clothes, neatly folded. Great-aunt Eleanor hadn't lived a life of luxury, despite the small sum of money the lawyer mentioned was part of the estate. Her wealth, if one could call it that, seemed to be in the land, in the view, in the history held within the cottage walls. As I began clearing out drawers, sorting through old papers, I found a small, wooden box tucked away in a bedside table. It wasn't locked, and I opened it with a sense of curiosity. Inside were bundles of letters, tied with faded ribbons, and a small, leather-bound journal. The letters were old, dated from the late 1940s and early 1950s. They were addressed to Great-aunt Eleanor, or just Eleanor, in various handwritings. Some were from my grandmother, her sister, Margaret, filled with news of our family. Mundane details of everyday life, but others were from people I didn't know, their contents hinting at a difficult time, a shared struggle, a secret. One series of letters, in a hurried, almost desperate hand, were from a woman named Mary. They spoke of difficult circumstances, of needing help, of a child. "Eleanor, please, he's not well. I don't know what to do. Can you help us? Can you keep him safe?" Another letter, from someone named Thomas, was brief and formal, referring to an agreement, a need for discretion, a difficult decision that had been made. "Eleanor, the papers are signed. The arrangement is final. For the best, as we agreed, but it is done. The child is safe. No one must ever know." The child. My great-aunt Eleanor's letters, the ones from Mary and Thomas, hinted at a child, a secret arrangement, a need for discretion. A promise of safety. Was it her child? A child she had to give up? The dates on the letters, late 1940s, early 1950s, that would make the child roughly the same age as me, or perhaps a little older. The journal was from the same period. Great Aunt Eleanor's handwriting, younger, less steady than I knew. Her entries were fragmented, filled with emotional turmoil, references to a difficult choice, a sacrifice, a secret she was forced to keep. She wrote about a young woman, a friend who was in trouble. She wrote about a baby. She wrote about the cottage, about it being a safe place, a place where the baby could be hidden, kept from judgment, from harm. May 10th, 1949. Mary was here today, with the baby. "He is beautiful, Eleanor, perfect in every way. But she is so young, so alone. Her family, they refuse to help. The shame, in this town, in these times, they said she had to choose, the baby or them. She chose the baby, but she cannot provide for him, not here, not now. I told her I would help. I would bring him here, to the cottage. No one will know. He will be safe here, hidden from the judgment, from the past. It is a risk, a great risk, but it is the only way, for Mary, for the baby." The secret was unfolding, layer by layer. A young woman, Mary, a friend of Great Aunt Eleanor's, had a baby out of wedlock in a time when such a thing brought immense shame. Her family disowned her. Great Aunt Eleanor, despite the risks, had offered the cottage as a sanctuary, a place to hide the baby, to keep him safe from the judgment of the town, the judgment of society. June 20th, 1949, the arrangement is made. Thomas facilitated it. The papers are signed. He is here, the baby, in the cottage. Mary wept when she left him. It broke my heart. She promised she would return, when she is able, when she has made a life for herself. I will raise him as my own. Here, in the cottage, hidden from the town. They will not know. They cannot know. He's safe now. But the secret is heavy. So heavy. Thomas said it was for the best, for his future. A chance at a normal life, a life free from the shame. The baby, a boy, brought to the cottage in 1949, raised by Great Aunt Eleanor, but not her son. A secret hidden from the town, from the world. Thomas, the man who facilitated the arrangement. Who was he? And what was his connection to Mary, to the baby, to Great Aunt Eleanor? Was he the baby's father? The language felt formal, detached, referring to an agreement, to papers being signed. The journals continued, detailing Great Aunt Eleanor's life, raising the boy in secret in the cottage. She wrote about his first steps, his first words, his laughter filling the small rooms overlooking the sea. She wrote about the constant fear of discovery, the lengths she went to keep him hidden from the prying eyes of the town. She rarely took him into Port Blossom, her life revolving around the cottage and the secluded coves nearby. She educated him herself, taught him about the sea, about the stars. She named him David. David Vance. David Vance. My great-aunt Eleanor's secret, adopted son, raised in hiding in the cottage overlooking the sea. The dates aligned. He would be around my age, a hidden branch of my family tree, a life lived in secret, a legacy I knew nothing about. The letters from Mary continued for a while, filled with longing for her son, with promises to return. But as the years passed, the letters became less frequent, the promises fading into silence. Great-aunt Eleanor wrote about her fear that Mary would never return, that she would be the only mother David ever knew. The last entry about David in the journal was dated when he was a teenager. Great-aunt Eleanor wrote about him growing up, about his curiosity about the world beyond the cottage, about his questions about his father, about his mother. She wrote about the difficulty of keeping the secret from him, the agonizing choice of whether to tell him the truth. The journals didn't reveal if she ever told him. They didn't reveal what happened to David after he became an adult. Did he stay in Port Blossom? Did he ever learn the truth about his origins? Did he ever find his mother Mary? The discovery of this hidden history, this secret life lived in the cottage, was overwhelming. My great-aunt Eleanor, the quiet, mysterious figure from my childhood, had been a woman of immense courage, making a difficult choice to protect a friend and a child, living a life of secrecy and sacrifice. And the child she raised, David Vance, was a hidden part of my family, a branch I never knew existed. Chapter 2.1. The journals and letters had opened a door to a hidden past, revealing a secret life lived within the walls of the dilapidated cottage. The story of Mary, a young woman facing shame and desperation in the late 1940s, and her baby boy, David, who was brought to the cottage, hidden from the world, and raised by my great-aunt Eleanor as her own. The letters from Mary, her biological mother, filled with longing and promises of return, and the quiet life of secrecy detailed in great-aunt Eleanor's journal, painted a picture of a profound sacrifice and a life built on a foundation of hidden truth. My great-aunt Eleanor, the woman I had known only as a distant relative, emerged from the pages of her journal as a woman of immense compassion and courage, making a monumental choice to protect a friend and give a child a chance at a life free from the stigma of his birth. The cottage, once just a crumbling building overlooking the sea, now felt like a sanctuary, a silent witness to a hidden chapter of our family history. But the journals ended with David as a teenager, leaving so many questions unanswered. What happened to David after that? Did he stay in Port Blossom? Did he ever learn the truth about his origins? Did he ever find his biological mother, Mary? And what about Thomas, the man mentioned in the letters, who facilitated the arrangement, who referred to papers being signed? Who was he, and what was his connection to Mary, to the baby, to great-aunt Eleanor? Was he the baby's father, acting from a distance to ensure his child's safety while remaining hidden himself? The formality of his letter suggested a more complex relationship than simply being the father. Perhaps a lawyer, a family friend, or someone else with the means to facilitate such a secret arrangement. The weight of this hidden history settled upon me. I had inherited not just a cottage and a small estate, but a legacy of secrets, of sacrifice, and of a hidden branch of my family tree. Finding out what happened to David Vance, the baby raised in secret in the cottage, felt like a responsibility, a way to honor my great-aunt Eleanor's courage and the life she had dedicated to protecting him. My search began in Port Blossom, the town that held the keys to David's story. It was a small, close-knit community, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and where, I suspected, old secrets were deeply embedded. My great-aunt Eleanor had lived a life of seclusion in the cottage, deliberately keeping David hidden from the town's view. This meant that any knowledge of his existence or his true identity was likely limited to a very few people, perhaps those who were directly involved in the arrangement or who suspected something was not quite as it seemed. I decided to start subtly, talking to older residents, people who might have been living in Port Blossom in the late 1940s and early 1950s. I visited the local historical society, a small room filled with dusty records and faded photographs. I asked about the town's history from that period, about the Callahan family, my great-aunt Eleanor's family name before she married. I inquired about anyone named Vance who lived in the cottage. Any stories about a woman living alone there? The older residents of Port Blossom were friendly, but their memories were often vague, or perhaps, I suspected, deliberately incomplete. They remembered Eleanor Callahan, the quiet woman who lived in the cottage. Some remembered her living alone. Others mentioned her having company sometimes. A young relative, perhaps, visiting for extended periods. The vagueness of their recollections, the hesitations when speaking of Eleanor Callahan and the cottage, hinted at a past that was not openly discussed. I looked through old town records, birth records, school records, searching for any mention of a child named David Vance, born around 1949 or 1950, living in Port Blossom. There were no official records of a David Vance living in the cottage or attending the local school. Great-aunt Eleanor had been successful in keeping his existence hidden from official view. The Thomas from the letters, the man who facilitated the arrangement, remained a mystery. Was he a local man, connected to Port Blossom, or someone from outside the town? The formality of his letter suggested a role of authority or legal involvement. I searched for anyone named Thomas in Port Blossom or nearby towns during that period who might fit that description. The search was broad, yielding many possibilities, but no clear connections. The cottage itself became a source of further investigation. I went through every room meticulously, searching for any hidden compartments, any further clues that great-aunt Eleanor might have left behind. I felt along the walls, the floorboards, the furniture, searching for anything that felt unusual. In the main living area, near the fireplace, I noticed a loose stone in the hearth. It seemed slightly out of place, less worn than the others. With effort, I managed to pry it loose. Behind it, in a small cavity, I found a small, rolled-up oilcloth. Unrolling it, I found another set of documents, a formal agreement dated June 1949, detailing the transfer of guardianship of a male infant, born May 1949, from his biological mother, Mary Davis, to Eleanor Callahan. The agreement was signed by Mary Davis, Eleanor Callahan, and witnessed by Thomas Peterson. Mary Davis, the young mother, her last name was Davis. My last name. Was Mary Davis related to me? Was she a distant cousin? And Thomas Peterson, the witness, the same last name as the lawyer who handled Great-Aunt Eleanor's estate. Could he be related? The agreement also stated that the biological father's name was not to be disclosed for reasons of privacy and to avoid scandal. This confirmed the secret nature of the birth and the arrangement. The document clarified some things. Mary Davis was the biological mother. Eleanor Callahan was the guardian. The baby was a boy, born in May 1949. But it didn't reveal the identity of the father, and it didn't reveal what happened to David after he became an adult. The connection to the name Peterson, the lawyer's last name, seemed significant. Could the lawyer, Mr. Peterson, be related to the Thomas Peterson who witnessed the agreement? Was this a family secret that the Peterson family was also aware of, perhaps even involved in? Chapter 2.2. The discovery of the formal guardianship agreement confirmed the essential truth revealed in the journals and letters. My great-aunt Eleanor Callahan had taken in a baby boy, David, born in May 1949, from his biological mother, Mary Davis, and raised him in secret in the cottage. The agreement was witnessed by a Thomas Peterson. The mystery of who Thomas was began to resolve. He was likely a local figure, perhaps a lawyer or someone connected to the community who facilitated the legal aspects of the secret arrangement while ensuring discretion. The name Peterson also connected him to the current lawyer handling the estate. My suspicion that the Peterson family was aware of, perhaps even involved in, this decades-old secret intensified. Peterson, the lawyer, had been reserved when speaking of great-aunt Eleanor and her past. Was his reticence due to the weight of this knowledge, a secret his own family had kept for generations? I decided to approach Mr. Peterson directly, not just as the executor of the estate, but as someone who might hold another piece of the puzzle. I scheduled a meeting with him at his office in Port Blossom. I brought the guardianship agreement, the journals, and the letters with me. Sitting in his quiet office, filled with the scent of old paper and polished wood, I laid the documents on his desk. "Mr. Peterson," I began, my voice a little shaky, "I've been going through Great-Aunt Eleanor's things, and I found some documents, some journals and letters that suggest a hidden history, a secret." Mr. Peterson's expression remained calm, professional, but I saw a subtle shift in his eyes, a flicker of recognition, perhaps of apprehension. As he looked at the aged documents, "A secret, you say?" he responded, his voice even. "Yes," I continued, "about a baby boy born in 1949, brought to the cottage, raised in secret by Great-Aunt Eleanor. His name was David Vance." I paused, watching his reaction. He didn't flinch, but his gaze grew more intense. The documents suggest the biological mother was Mary Davis, and the guardianship agreement was witnessed by a Thomas Peterson. In 1949, Mr. Peterson was silent for a long moment, looking at the documents, then at me. The professional demeanor softened, replaced by a somber reflection. "My grandfather was Thomas Peterson," he said quietly. "He was the town lawyer back then, and he was involved in that situation. He helped facilitate the arrangement. He knew. The Peterson family knew. The secret was not just limited to Great-Aunt Eleanor and Mary Davis. It was a secret shared by a family in the heart of Port Blossom, a secret embedded in the town's history. My grandfather never spoke of it openly," Mr. Peterson continued. "It was a different time. an unmarried mother, it was a scandal. The families involved wanted discretion. My grandfather, he did what he could to ensure the baby was safe, that the arrangement was legally sound while protecting everyone's reputations. It was a difficult situation for all involved. He confirmed the story in the journals and letters. Mary Davis, the young woman from a respectable family, had a baby out of wedlock. The father's identity was kept secret. Mary's family, fearing the shame, sent her away, but she wanted her baby to have a chance at a good life, free from the stigma. Great Aunt Eleanor, a kind and courageous woman, had agreed to take the baby, to raise him in the isolation of the cottage, away from the prying eyes of the town. Thomas Peterson, his grandfather, had facilitated the legal transfer of guardianship, ensuring the secret was protected. "So, David Vance," I said, my voice heavy with the weight of this hidden life. "What happened to him? Did he stay in Port Blossom? Did he ever learn the truth?" Mr. Peterson's expression grew somber again. "David, he grew up here, in the cottage," he said. "A quiet boy, kept to himself. Everyone in town knew Eleanor Callahan lived alone in the cottage. They saw her sometimes, but rarely saw the boy. There were rumors, of course, whispers. His small town like this, secrets are hard to keep completely hidden. But no one knew the full truth. Not the details of the arrangement. Not who his parents were. Did he stay in Port Blossom?" I asked again. "No," Mr. Peterson replied. "He left. When he was quite young, in his late teens, I believe. He went away to the city. I don't think he ever came back. Not that I know of." "Did he ever learn the truth?" I pressed. "Did Great Aunt Eleanor ever tell him?" Mr. Peterson hesitated. "I believe she intended to," he said, choosing his words carefully. "But the opportunity, or the courage, perhaps she never found it. The secret. It was a heavy burden for her. For my grandfather, too. He carried the knowledge of that arrangement throughout his life. So David left Port Blossom as a young man, possibly never knowing the truth about his origins, about the woman who raised him, not being his biological mother, about the secret of his birth, the possibility that he lived his entire life unaware of his true parentage, unaware of the sacrifice Great Aunt Eleanor made for him, was heartbreaking. "What about Mary Davis?" I asked. "The biological mother. Did she ever return? Did she ever try to find David?" Mr. Peterson shook his head. "Not that I know of," he said. "Her family sent her away to live with relatives elsewhere. I don't believe she ever came back to Port Blossom. The shame, it was too much, I suppose. She may have gone on to have another life, a family, but not here, not openly." The story of Mary Davis, the young mother forced to give up her baby, was another layer of sadness in this complex tale. Her life, too, had been shaped by the unforgiving societal norms of the time, by a choice she was forced to make, a sacrifice she had to endure. The truth about David Vance remained incomplete. He had left Port Blossom as a young man, his fate unknown, potentially unaware of his origins. My responsibility, guided by Great Aunt Eleanor's legacy, felt clear. I needed to try and find David, to share the truth with him, to give him the answers that had been hidden from him for a lifetime. Chapter 3.1. My meeting with Mr. Peterson confirmed the existence of David Vance, the baby raised in secret in the cottage by my great aunt Eleanor. It also confirmed the details of the guardianship agreement, the involvement of his grandfather, Thomas Peterson. and the heartbreaking reality that David likely left Port Blossom as a young man without ever knowing the truth about his biological mother, Mary Davis, or the sacrifice great-aunt Eleanor made in raising him. The weight of this knowledge, the responsibility of being the one to uncover this decades-old secret, settled heavily upon me. My task now felt clear. I needed to find David Vance. He was my biological relative, a hidden branch of my family tree, a man whose life had been shaped by secrets he didn't know existed. Sharing the truth with him felt like a way to honor Great-Aunt Eleanor's legacy, to bring closure to a story that had been shrouded in secrecy for over 70 years. Finding someone who disappeared from public record in the late 1960s or early 1970s with only a name and the knowledge that he moved to a city was a daunting task. David Vance, born May 1949, raised in Port Blossom, moved away as a young man. This was my starting point. I began my search online using genealogical databases, people search websites, and historical records. I looked for anyone named David Vance, born around 1949, whose history might connect to Port Blossom. It was a broad search, yielding many potential matches, but no clear path forward. I also enlisted the help of a professional genealogist. I shared with her the story of the cottage, the journals, the letters, the guardianship agreement, and the limited information I had about David Vance. She was intrigued by the mystery and the human story behind it, and agreed to help me in my search. The genealogist's expertise in navigating complex records and databases proved invaluable. She was able to access records that were not publicly available, piecing together fragments of information that helped narrow down the possibilities. We focused on major cities that young people from rural areas often moved to for work or opportunity in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Through painstaking research, we found a record of a David Vance who had enrolled in college in a city several states away in the early 1970s. The date of birth aligned. The location was a plausible destination for someone leaving a small coastal town. This felt like a promising lead. We continued to trace the life of this David Vance. College records led us to a possible career path, a field of study that might have led to a specific profession. We searched for professional directories, looking for someone with his name and profession in that city or surrounding areas. The search was slow, filled with false leads and dead ends. Decades had passed. Lives had been lived. Names had changed. Records were lost or incomplete. The silence of the past often felt impenetrable. As weeks turned into months, the genealogist uncovered more fragments of information. A marriage record for a David Vance in the late 1970s, a possible address from the 1980s, a potential career path in engineering. Each new piece of information was a small victory, a step closer to potentially finding the man who was raised in secret in the cottage. Simultaneously, I continued to explore the history of Mary Davis, the biological mother. Who was she? Where did she come from? Did she have other children, a family? And what was her life like after she left her baby in the care of her friend? The guardianship agreement listed her as Mary Davis, with an address in a nearby town, not Port Blossom. I researched the Davis family in that town, looking for anyone named Mary Davis, who would have been a young woman in the late 1940s. I found records of a Davis family who owned a farm there. and within that family, a daughter named Mary, born in the late 1920s. Tracing Mary Davis's life after 1949 was also challenging. The records were limited. It seems she, too, had moved away from her hometown after the birth of her son. The shame, the societal judgment. In the midst of complexity, I found records of a Davis family who owned a farm there. And within that family, a daughter named likely made it difficult for her to remain in a place where her secret was known or suspected. The genealogist's search for David Vance eventually led to a potential current location. A recent address in a city across the country, a city where the David Vance, who had studied engineering in the 1970s, seemed to have settled and had a career. It felt both exhilarating and terrifying to have a potential current address for David Vance. After months of searching, of following faint trails of information, I was possibly on the verge of finding the hidden child of the cottage, the man whose life had been shaped by secrets he didn't know existed. Chapter 3.2. Armed with the potential current address for David Vance, the man raised in secret in the cottage, the reality of my search shifted from historical investigation to a possible present-day encounter. The thought of contacting him, of revealing a truth that would undoubtedly shatter his understanding of his own life, was daunting. How do you tell a man in his 70s that the woman who raised him was not his biological mother, that his birth was a secret, and that his biological mother was a woman he likely never knew existed? I consulted with the genealogist and with Mr. Peterson, the lawyer whose family had been involved in the secret arrangement decades ago. We discussed the best way to approach David Vance if the address was indeed correct. The consensus was that a direct but sensitive approach was necessary. A letter, perhaps, explaining the context, the discovery of the journals and documents, and the possibility of a shared history. I decided to write the letter myself. It felt like the most personal way to convey the weight of the discovery and the sincerity of my intentions. I introduced myself, explaining my connection to great-aunt Eleanor Callaghan and her cottage in Port Blossom. I mentioned finding her journals and old documents, and how they revealed a story about a baby boy named David, born in May 1949, who was raised in secret in the cottage by great-aunt Eleanor. I explained about the guardianship agreement and the name of the biological mother, Mary Davis. I gently explained that the records suggested this David Vance, born in May 1949, might be the same person I was writing to, and that if so, there was a significant, previously unknown family history that connected us. I included copies of the guardianship agreement and excerpts from great-aunt Eleanor's journal that spoke of raising him. I offered to share more, to answer any questions, and emphasized that I wasn't looking for anything, only to share a truth that had been hidden for a long time. I included my phone number and email address. Sending the letter felt like sending a message across time, carrying with it the weight of secrets and the hope of understanding. The wait for a response was agonizing. Each day that passed without a reply brought a fresh wave of anxiety and doubt. Had the letter reached him? Was it the right David Vance? How was he reacting to the earth-shattering information? Then, one evening, my phone rang. An unknown number from a city far away. My heart leaped into my throat. I took a deep breath and answered, "Hello? Is this Clara Davis?" The voice was male, older, with a hint of surprise and perhaps confusion. "Yes," I said, my voice trembling. "This is Clara Davis." "My name is David Vance," the voice replied. I received your letter." It was him, the man raised in secret in the cottage, David Vance. "Thank you for calling, David," I said, tears welling up in my eyes. I know that letter must have been a lot to take in. "A lot is an understatement," he said, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. "A baby raised in secret? Guardianship agreements? My mother not being my biological mother?" "Yes," I confirmed, my voice gentle. "The documents suggest that the woman who raised you, Eleanor Callaghan Vance, was your guardian, your adoptive mother, and that your biological mother was Mary Davis." There was a long silence on the line, filled with the weight of 70 years of unspoken history. Then David spoke again, his voice filled with a mix of disbelief, confusion, and a dawning sense of revelation. "My mother," he said softly. "She was a wonderful woman, quiet, kept to herself. She never mentioned any of this, any secrets. The letters from your biological mother, Mary Davis, to your adoptive mother, Eleanor," I explained, "suggest that it was a secret arrangement made to protect your biological mother from the shame of an out-of-wedlock birth in 1949. Your adoptive mother, Eleanor, made a profound sacrifice, raising you as her own, keeping you hidden to protect you and your biological mother from the judgment of the time." Mary Davis, David repeated the name, a name that held a sudden, profound significance. "My biological mother. Do you know what happened to her? Is she still alive?" The question brought a wave of sadness. I had also researched Mary Davis's life, and my findings were heartbreaking. "I researched Mary Davis," I said gently. "The records are limited, but they suggest she moved away from her hometown after your birth. And I found a death record for a Mary Davis from that region who passed away many years ago. It's difficult to be certain without more information, but it's possible that she is no longer with us." The news brought a quiet sadness to David's voice. The chance to meet his biological mother, to understand her story, was likely lost forever. "So Eleanor," David said, referring to my great-aunt, the woman who raised him, "she wasn't just my mother. She was related to you." "Yes," I said. "Eleanor Callaghan Vance was my grandmother's older sister. She was my great-aunt. And Mary Davis, your biological mother, my grandmother's cousin. We are related, David, distantly, through your biological mother's side of the family, and through great-aunt Eleanor's side. The layers of connection, the intertwined family trees, were immense. We were relatives, brought together by a secret kept for decades, by a cottage overlooking the sea, and by a bundle of letters and a journal that had finally revealed the truth." Chapter 4.1, The initial conversation with David Vance, was a whirlwind of shock, revelation, and the dawning realization of a shared, hidden history. The man I had searched for, the baby raised in secret in the cottage, was real, and he was grappling with a truth that shattered his lifelong understanding of his own identity. We were connected, not just through the secret of his birth and the woman who raised him, but through intertwined family lines, a shared ancestry that had been obscured by decades of silence. David had lived his entire life believing Eleanor Callaghan Vance was his biological mother. He had loved her, honored her memory, never suspecting the sacrifice she had made or the secret she had carried. The news that his biological mother was a different woman, Mary Davis, and that his life began with a secret arrangement to hide his birth, was a monumental shift in his understanding of himself and his family history. We continued to talk frequently, the conversations moving from the initial shock to a deeper exploration of the past. David shared memories of growing up in the cottage with Eleanor, of her quiet strength, her love, her occasional sadness that he had never fully understood. He spoke of the isolation of their life, the limited contact with the outside world, the feeling that there were parts of his mother's past she never spoke of. Now, he understood why. I shared more details from Great-Aunt Eleanor's journals and the letters from Mary Davis, painting a fuller picture of the circumstances surrounding his birth, the societal pressures of the time, and the difficult choices that were made. We pieced together what we could about Mary Davis's life after she left him. The likelihood that she had passed away years ago. The sadness of a connection that would never be fully realized. The mystery of David's biological father remained. The guardianship agreement explicitly stated his name was not to be disclosed. Great-Aunt Eleanor's journals offered no clues. Thomas Peterson, the lawyer's grandfather, was listed as a witness, suggesting he knew the father's identity, but he was long gone. Was the father someone from Port Blossom, someone from Mary Davis's hometown, or someone else entirely? Was he aware of David's existence? Did he play a role in the secret arrangement beyond simply being the biological father? David expressed a strong desire to learn more about his biological father, to understand that part of his heritage. It felt like another piece of the puzzle he needed to find to complete his understanding of his origins. Our search for David's biological father began. It was an even more challenging search than finding David himself, given the lack of a name and the deliberate efforts to conceal his identity. We had only a few clues: the approximate age of Mary Davis at the time of David's birth, the social context of the late 1940s, and the possibility that the father might have been connected to either Mary Davis's hometown or Port Blossom. We worked with the genealogist, exploring various avenues. We looked for men who were roughly the same age as Mary Davis, who might have been in a relationship with her in the late 1940s. We cross-referenced names from her hometown with names from Port Blossom, searching for any connections that might have brought a man from one place into Mary's life in the other. It was a painstaking process, filled with speculation and dead ends. The past, with its carefully guarded secrets, felt incredibly difficult to penetrate. Then, the genealogist stumbled upon something intriguing. While researching Mary Davis's family history, she found a series of letters written by Mary's sister to a cousin in the early 1950s. The letters, filled with family news and gossip, included a few veiled references to Mary and her troubles, and hinted at a connection to the coast. One letter mentioned a young man from the coast who had visited their town around the time Mary was in distress. The name mentioned was simply James, a young man named James from the coast. Could this be David's biological father? The reference to a connection to the coast felt significant, linking him to Port Blossom or a nearby coastal community. We began searching for men named James from the coast, who would have been roughly the same age as Mary Davis, who might have had a connection to her hometown. This search was still broad, but it provided a name and a potential location. Simultaneously, David decided he wanted to visit Port Blossom, to see the cottage where he grew up, to walk the streets of the town that held the secrets of his past. It was a journey back to his origins, a way of connecting with the place that was both his home and the location of a profound deception. I offered to go with him. It felt important to support him in this journey, to be there as he revisited the place that held the keys to his hidden history. Chapter 4.1. David's decision to visit Port Blossom was a significant step in his journey of uncovering his identity. The cottage, the town, the sea, they were all integral to the story of his hidden birth and the life he had lived with Great Aunt Eleanor. Returning felt like a necessary pilgrimage, a way to connect with the physical reality of his past and the secrets it held. We traveled to Port Blossom together. Seeing David in the town where he had grown up in isolation, a secret hidden from the community, was a powerful experience. He was visibly emotional, walking the familiar streets, looking at the buildings, remembering fragments of his childhood. The cottage stood on the cliff edge, weathered by time and the elements, but still possessing a quiet strength, a silent witness to the life it had sheltered. Walking through its rooms with David, hearing his memories of growing up there with Great Aunt Eleanor, brought the story to life in a way that journals and letters never could. He showed me the small window seat where he used to sit and watch the sea, the corner of the yard where he had a small garden, the places that held the echoes of his hidden childhood. We visited the local cemetery. David found Eleanor Callahan Vance's grave, a simple headstone overlooking the sea. He stood there for a long time, a mix of sadness and gratitude on his face, mourning the woman who had raised him, acknowledging the immense sacrifice she had made. We also visited the Port Blossom Historical Society again, armed with the new information from Mary Davis's sister's letters. The mention of a young man named James from the coast visiting Mary's hometown around the time of David's conception. We focused our research on men named James from Port Blossom and nearby coastal communities who would have been the right age to be David's father. The genealogist continued her work remotely, providing us with potential leads and information. The name James from the coast was still a broad category, but combined with the time period and the connection to Mary Davis's hometown, it helped narrow the search. We spoke again with older residents of Port Blossom, sharing parts of the story, the history of Great Aunt Eleanor and a baby boy she raised in the cottage. We were careful with the details, not revealing the full truth of the secret arrangement or the baby's biological mother initially, wanting to gauge their reactions and see if they held any pieces of the puzzle. Some residents offered vague recollections of Eleanor Callahan living alone, of a quiet life in the cottage. Others mentioned rumors, whispers they had heard as children about a baby in the cottage, a secret kept from the town. The resistance to speaking about the past was still present, but there were also glimpses of curiosity, of a willingness to share fragmented memories. Then, an elderly woman, a distant relative of the Peterson family, shared a story she had heard from her grandfather, Thomas Peterson, the lawyer who witnessed the guardianship agreement. She spoke of a difficult situation many years ago, involving a young woman from out of town and a young man from Port Blossom and a baby. She mentioned that her grandfather had helped facilitate a private arrangement, a way to ensure the baby was cared for without causing a scandal. She didn't know the names of the young couple, only that the young man was from a respected family in Port Blossom. A young man from a respected family in Port Blossom. This new clue felt significant. It suggested that David's biological father was likely someone whose identity, if revealed, would have caused a significant stir in the community. We began researching respected families in Port Blossom from that era, looking for young men named James, who would have been the right age to be David's father. A name James from the coast, combined with being from a respected family, helped focus our search. Among the prominent families in Port Blossom, one name stood out: the Calligans, great-aunt Eleanor's own family. They were a well-established, respected family in the town. Could the father be someone from great-aunt Eleanor's own family? Her brother? A cousin? The thought was unsettling, adding another layer of complexity to the already intricate web of secrets and relationships. If the father was a Callahan, it would explain great-aunt Eleanor's deep involvement, her willingness to make such a profound sacrifice to protect the baby and the family name. We focused our search on men named James from the Callahan family, who would have been the right age to be David's father. The genealogist, working from the family tree, identified a potential candidate: James Callaghan, a younger cousin of great-aunt Eleanor, who would have been a young man in the late 1940s and who, according to records, had moved away from Port Blossom shortly after 1949. James Callaghan. Could he be David's biological father? The young man named James from the coast who visited Mary Davis's hometown? The young man from a respected family in Port Blossom? The timing, the name, the location, the connection to the Callaghan family. It all aligned. Chapter 4.2. The possibility that James Callaghan, a younger cousin of my great-aunt Eleanor, was David's biological father, added another layer of complexity and a painful irony to the hidden history. It meant that the secret arrangement to hide David's birth was not just about protecting Mary Davis from shame, but also about protecting the reputation of the respected Callahan family, my own family. Great-aunt Eleanor had not only sacrificed her own life to raise David in secret, but she had done so, perhaps, to protect her family from a scandal that would have stained their name in the close-knit community of Port Blossom. The revelation that David's father was likely James Callaghan, a member of my own family, brought a mix of emotions, a sense of finding another piece of the puzzle, but also a deeper understanding of the extent of the secrecy and the lengths to which families would go to protect their reputation in that era. James Callaghan had seemingly gone on to live his life away from Port Blossom, perhaps never acknowledging David's existence, leaving his cousin, great-aunt Eleanor, to carry the burden of raising his son in secret. Our search for James Callaghan began. We found records of him moving to another state, marrying, and having a family. He had passed away several years ago. The chance to confront him, to ask him about Mary Davis, about David, was lost forever. However, our research revealed that James Callaghan had children, descendants living in another part of the country, David's half-siblings, people who likely knew nothing about his existence or the secret history of their father's past in Port Blossom. The decision of whether and how to approach James Callaghan's children with this astonishing revelation was a difficult one. it would undoubtedly shatter their understanding of their father, their family history, and their own lineage. It felt like I was once again in the position of being the bearer of a truth that would cause pain and disruption. David and I discussed it at length. He felt a complex mix of emotions about his biological father, a yearning to understand the man, tempered by a sense of anger and abandonment that James Callahan had seemingly walked away from his responsibility, leaving Eleanor to raise him in secret. David wanted to know more about his father, to understand that part of his heritage, but he was also hesitant about disrupting the lives of people who were unaware of this hidden history. Ultimately, David decided that he wanted to reach out to James Callahan's children. It was a way of connecting with his biological father's side of the family, of finding a piece of his identity that had been missing for a lifetime. We decided on a similar approach to the one I had used to contact David. A sensitive letter explaining the discovery of the journals and documents, the story of his birth and adoption, and the potential connection to their father, James Callaghan. David wrote the letter himself, a deeply personal message expressing his feelings, his desire to understand, and his hope for a connection, if they were open to it. Sending the letter to James Callahan's children was another step into the unknown, another moment of releasing a hidden truth into the world, uncertain of the ripple effects it would cause. While we waited for a response, David and I spent more time in Port Blossom, exploring the town, the cottage, the places that held the keys to his past. We learned more about the Callahan family history, about the societal norms of the time, about the lengths to which families would go to protect their reputation. Understanding the historical context didn't erase the pain of the secret, but it helped to humanize the choices that were made, to see them as products of a different era, different pressures. The cottage, once a symbol of secrecy and isolation, began to feel like a place of strength and resilience, a sanctuary where a brave woman had made a profound sacrifice to protect a child and a friend. We started the process of restoring the cottage, a way of honoring Great Aunt Eleanor's legacy and creating a space that reflected the truth of its history, a history that was no longer hidden. Days turned into weeks and then months. No response from James Callahan's children. David was disappointed, but understanding. He knew that the revelation was immense and that they might need time to process it, or they might choose not to engage at all. The possibility that some secrets, even when revealed, are too painful, too disruptive, to be fully embraced was a quiet sadness we both had to accept. Chapter 5.1 Life has a way of unfolding in unexpected ways, weaving together threads of past and present, revealing hidden patterns we never knew existed. My journey to Port Blossom, triggered by the inheritance of a dilapidated cottage from a distant great-aunt, had led me down a path of uncovering a 70-year-old family secret, a story of a hidden child, a brave woman's sacrifice, and the intricate web of relationships and societal pressures that shaped lives in the past. The cottage, once a silent witness to a life lived in hiding, was slowly being restored, piece by piece, becoming a tangible symbol of the hidden history it contained. Working on the cottage became a form of therapy, a way of connecting with Great Aunt Eleanor's legacy, with the strength and resilience she had embodied. David Vance, the man raised in secret within its walls, had found a piece of his identity, a connection to his biological mother, Mary Davis, and the likely identity of his biological father, James Callahan, a cousin from my own family tree. The revelation had been life-altering, a challenging but necessary step in understanding his origins. The lack of response from James Callahan's children was a quiet sadness, a reminder that some doors, once closed by secrets, may remain shut, the weight of the past too heavy for some to bear. David was disappointed, but he had found a sense of peace in knowing the truth, in understanding the circumstances of his birth, and in connecting with his biological mother's side of the family through me and the story I had uncovered. Our relationship, forged in the crucible of this shared secret, had grown into unique and meaningful connection. We were relatives, brought together by a hidden history, a history we were now sharing, honoring the lives and choices of those who came before us. David was no longer just the hidden child of the cottage. He was a part of my family, a branch of the tree that had been hidden for decades, now brought into the light. While we were focused on the restoration of the cottage and processing the emotional weight of the past, another unexpected development occurred. A letter arrived for David, forwarded from his old address. It was from a lawyer, informing him that he was named as a beneficiary in the will of a distant relative, a distant cousin named Eleanor Sullivan, who had recently passed away. Eleanor Sullivan. The name resonated. I had researched the Sullivan family in Mary Davis's hometown, and there had been a connection, a branching of the family tree. Could this Eleanor Sullivan be related to Mary Davis? Could she have known something about David? David, intrigued, contacted the lawyer. He learned that Eleanor Sullivan was indeed a relative of his biological mother, Mary Davis. She was an older cousin, someone Mary had reportedly been close to in her youth. The lawyer mentioned that Eleanor Sullivan had left a small collection of personal items to David, including some old family photographs and a journal. This new discovery, this unexpected inheritance from a distant relative, felt like another thread of destiny, another piece of the puzzle being revealed. The journal from Eleanor Sullivan might hold more information about Mary Davis, about her life after 1949, about David's biological father, perhaps even a different perspective on the events of the past. David traveled to collect the items. He returned with a box filled with old photographs, letters, and a small, worn journal. The journal was Eleanor Sullivan's, her entries spanning decades. She wrote about her life, her family, and importantly, about Mary Davis. Her entries confirmed Mary's heartbreak at having to give up her baby, her ongoing sadness and longing for the son she had to leave behind. But the journal also revealed a truth that had been hinted at, but never confirmed: the identity of David's biological father. Eleanor Sullivan's journal entries from the late 1940s spoke of Mary's relationship with a young man from the coast, a man named James Callahan. She wrote about their courtship, their love, and Mary's devastation when James's family, a respected family from Port Blossom, refused to allow him to marry Mary when she became pregnant. Fearing the scandal, James was pressured to end the relationship, to deny the child, to move on with his life, protecting the family name. Eleanor Sullivan's entries confirmed that James Callahan was indeed David's biological father, a truth hidden by shame, societal pressure, and a family's desire to protect its reputation. The journal also contained letters from Mary to Eleanor Sullivan over the years. Letters filled with updates on her life, her quiet sadness, and her enduring love for the son she had given up. Mary had gone on to build a life elsewhere, but she never forgot David. She had even tried, subtly, to keep track of him over the years, hearing snippets of information about him through distant family connections who knew of Great Aunt Eleanor and the cottage. The new journal, the letters, the photographs. They provided David with a fuller picture of his biological mother's life, her pain, her enduring love for him, and they confirmed, definitively, the identity of his biological father, James Callahan, and the reasons why his existence had been kept a secret by both families. The unexpected inheritance from Eleanor Sullivan felt like a final piece of the puzzle, a way for the truth to fully emerge, guided by threads of connection and destiny that spanned generations. Chapter 5.2. The journey that began with inheriting a dilapidated cottage and a bundle of old documents had led to the uncovering of a complex, multi-layered family secret, a story of a hidden child, a brave woman's sacrifice, and the intertwined lives of several families shaped by the societal pressures of the past. The discovery of Eleanor Sullivan's journal and letters had provided crucial missing pieces, confirming the identity of David's biological father and giving David a deeper understanding of his biological mother's life and her enduring love for him. David had found his story, a story that was both heartbreaking and filled with the quiet strength of those who had made difficult choices in challenging times. He had come to understand the immense sacrifice Great Aunt Eleanor had made in raising him in secret, the love she had poured into his life, the courage it had taken to defy societal norms to protect him. He also understood his biological mother, Mary Davis, her pain at having to give him up, her enduring love, and the difficult hand she had been dealt by fate and the unforgiving judgment of her era. And he understood his biological father, James Callahan, a man caught between love and family expectation, a man whose life, too, had been shaped by the pressure to conform and to protect a family name, even at the cost of denying his own child. The cottage, once a symbol of secrecy and isolation, was now a place of profound meaning, a tangible link to the hidden past, a testament to the lives that had been lived within its walls, the secrets it had held. The restoration of the cottage became a shared project, a way for David and me to connect with our family history, to honor the people who came before us, and to create a space that reflected the truth of its past, a past that was no longer hidden. David, with the knowledge of his biological father's identity, chose not to pursue a connection with James Callahan's living children. He felt that revealing the truth at this stage would cause unnecessary pain and disruption to their lives. He had found his story. He had connected with his biological mother's history through Eleanor Sullivan's journals, and he had found a sense of peace with the knowledge of his origins. The need for external validation or connection to his biological father's family was less important than the internal peace and understanding he had found. Our relationship, forged in the crucible of this shared secret and the journey of discovery, had grown into a deep and meaningful connection. We were family, brought together by a hidden history, a history we were now carrying together, honoring the lives and choices of those who came before us. The journals, the letters, the guardianship agreement, the old photographs, the cottage overlooking the sea, the unexpected inheritance from Eleanor Sullivan. They were all threads in a complex tapestry, weaving together a story of love, loss, sacrifice, and the enduring power of truth to connect and to heal. My life, which began with inheriting a dilapidated cottage and a sense of vague family mystery, had been profoundly changed. I had uncovered a hidden branch of my family tree, connected with a relative I never knew existed, and gained a deeper understanding of the lives and choices of the women who came before me, particularly my great-aunt Eleanor Vance, a woman of quiet courage and immense sacrifice. The whispers in the walls of the cottage, the secrets they had held for 70 years, had finally been heard, revealing a truth that brought complexity and emotional depth to our family history, but also, finally, a sense of peace, understanding, and a profound appreciation for the intricate ways lives are intertwined by love, by secrets, and by the unpredictable hand of fate. The journey of uncovering the hidden past had led not just to answers about a secret child, but to a deeper understanding of myself, my family, and the extraordinary tapestry of human lives, woven with threads of both light and shadow, secrets kept and truths revealed, all in the quiet resilience of the human heart.